Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Chair.
Good afternoon, Chairperson.
Afternoon. I think now we should be ready to go. Mr. Dlamini, is everything in order that we may start?
Yes, Mr. Mkhize, everything is in order. I think we can start now. Having discussed with Mr. Ndanzi, he said we should just move on to the health and safety and omit the ethics moments.
Okay, no, it's fine. We'll just have to skip that one. Let me just give a minute just for some people that are still joining, noting that we've got the challenges of load shedding. Okay, let's now get started. My name is Mkhize, and I would just like to take this moment to welcome all of you to the Electricity Subcommittee ELS public hearing on ELS public hearing Eskom's 5th multi-year price determination, MYPD 5 for short. This application for the 2022-23, 2023-24, and 2024-25 financial years. As said earlier on, my name is Mkhize. I'm the full-time regulator member, primarily responsible for petroleum pipelines, and standing in here for Mr. Nhlanhla Kumede, who is unavailable, being away on NERSA business. He is the FTRM responsible for electricity regulation. I'll be the chairperson of this public hearing, and I would like to introduce the other members on the panel, starting with Advocate Nomalanga Sithole, who is the Chief Executive Officer of NERSA, as well as the ALS member. Advocate Sithole. If you may just unmute yourself, please.
Oh, I was talking to a muted mic. Good afternoon, Chairperson, and good afternoon to everyone else who's present on this platform. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Advocate Sithole. I also want to mention that Madam Nomfundo Maseti, who is the pipe gas regulation full-time regulator member, as well as the ALS member, is unfortunately unavailable today also due to a bereavement, having lost her sister. I have, fortunately, Mr. Tembani Pukula, who is the NERSA chairperson, and an ES member, is quite familiar to most of us, having been with NERSA before and now having come back as the chairperson of NERSA. Mr. Pukula, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Good afternoon, everyone. And yes, I will be part of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pukula. I'm not so sure whether Madam Precious Bia, who's a part-time regulator member, recently also joined NERSA, as well as the member of the Electricity Subcommittee. Madam Sbia, I understand that you are facing load shedding and she could be struggling with that, but as soon as he joins, as soon as she joins, Mr. Eliezer Dlamini will alert me, and then she will then proceed as a panel member.
That's correct, sir.
Thank you. This hearing was duly advertised in the following newspapers: the print media nationally, Business Day on the 11th and 12th September 2022, the BELT on the 12th September 2022, and the National Independent on the 12th of September 2022. It was also posted on our website, and it is held in accordance with the Energy Regulator Act, in which affected parties are given an opportunity to submit their views and present relevant facts and evidence to the energy regulator. This hearing is governed by the NERSA rules on public hearings, which can be summarized as follows. 1. All parties will be required to make their presentations under oath. 2. Other than the applicant, all presenters have been allocated 20 minutes each to make their presentations. 3. Only members of the panel may ask questions to the presenters. However, members of the public may forward their questions to Mr. Eliezer Dlamini at eliezer.dlamini@nersa.org.za. If you may also put it on the chat, Mr. Dlamini, your email address, and then the panel will decide on how to deal with those questions. Fourth and lastly, should presenters wish to present information they consider confidential, the panel will make a ruling on whether to close the meeting or to have the information submitted in writing. The recording of this hearing will be done through our recording system, and there will also be a live audio streaming on NERSA's Twitter pages, which is at NERSA_ZA. This will be the official record of this meeting. The house rules for this meeting are: please switch your cell phone to silent mode. 2, please ensure that your mic and video are switched off at all times unless you are making a presentation. Lastly, please use the chat responsibly to contribute to a meaningful discussion throughout the public hearing session. Please desist from using it as some form of heckling those who will be presenting. We have the following 6 presenters for today's public hearing, and Eskom will be granted 30 minutes as the applicant, and the other presenter shall be granted 20 minutes to present. Eskom will then also be given an opportunity to respond to questions at the end of the program. We have Mr. Khalid Kasim representing Eskom, Madam Liz McDade representing OUTA, the Organization Against Tax Abuse, Mr. Jack Armour representing Free State Agriculture, Madam Francesca de Kasparis representing Southern African Faith Communities Environmental Institute. And we've got Madam Gillian van der Merwe representing Municipal Accounts Disputes. And lastly, Mr. Onika Masego as a private citizen. Before we proceed, I would like us to note that NERSA is actually an organization in mourning with the passing on of our dear colleague, Mr. Dennis T. Siemela, on the 14th of September 2022. Mr. Siemela was employed at NERSA as the head of Department for Electricity Licensing, Compliance and Dispute Resolution. He is known to most of people at Eskom, the electricity industry as a whole, as well as NERSA. So our heartfelt condolences to Mr. Siemela's family, friends and colleagues on the loss of their loved one. May they and all of us find hope in the midst of sorrow and comfort in the midst of pain. I therefore humbly call upon all of us to please observe a moment of silence, noting Psalm 90 verse 12, which calls upon us to let God teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts unto wisdom. May we observe a moment of silence. Thank you very much. May his precious soul rest in eternal peace. We will then proceed by calling upon the applicant, represented by Mr. Kasim, to step forward to present. But prior to that, Mr. Dlamini, if you may help with the health and safety aspects. Mr. Dlamini, may you help with the health and safety aspects? You remain muted, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. In terms of our health aspect, all attendees of meetings at the NESA building are required to observe the health and safety mandatory precautionary measures. Ensure we need to sanitize our hands and wash them with soap and water, and observe social distance at all times. Even though COVID has passed us, those who are comfortable to continue to wear masks should still continue to wear masks. Avoid interchanging stationary water bottles and glasses and bottom gadgets, and physical contact is still not allowed. And everyone is informed that meeting rooms are disinfected regularly. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize.
Thank you very much. We'll then proceed to call upon Mr. Kasim to step forward to present.
Good afternoon, Chair and members.
Mr. Kasim, thank you very much. I would just like to know if you've got any objections to taking an oath.
No, Chair.
Thank you very much. Please raise your hand and affirm the following. You will solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole truth.
I do, Chair.
For the record, please state your name, company, and designation.
My name is Caleb Kassam. I'm the Chief Financial Officer of Eskom.
Thank you very much, sir. You've got your 30 minutes to proceed to make a presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to just put up the presentation. Chair, I assume you can all see it.
Yes.
Okay, Chair, I think firstly, on behalf of Eskom, we just want to express our condolences both to Dennis Simila and his family and loved ones, and also hearing today the passing of the sister of Ms. Masetti. So condolences to both those families from Eskom. And as you've indicated, Chair, that Dennis was a colleague at Eskom for a number of years, and he'll be sorely missed to the industry and everyone that has worked for him. Chair, I think the second item, and an apology from Eskom on behalf of Eskom as well, to the public of South Africa, our humble apologies for the difficulties that everyone is experiencing during this load shedding period, in particular at State 6. Eskom is committed to address the situation as fast as possible, and we are working around the clock to deal with that situation. So just apologies on behalf of Eskom. If I now move to my presentation, Chair, the first slide, Chair and panel members, is just to recap that since the original application of submitted in June 2021.
Excuse me, Mr. Kasim. Sorry to interject. Yes. I would appreciate if you can just put the one screen, the one slide bigger. Just put on slide mode so you can see one slide at a time clearer.
Sharing your desktop.
Okay.
Sharing.
Okay, give me a minute. We'll just correct it.
Share the action presentation. Yeah, just continue.
Is that better, Chair?
Better. Thank you.
Okay.
Perfect.
Okay. I'll proceed. Chair, yes, just to bring the audience up to speed, following the original application, that being rejected by NERSA and through the court processes, NERSA made a decision in January 22 through those public hearings for the first year of this MYPD cycle of 9.6%. But I think, Chair, I think what's important, two important factors that I'll address in this presentation that has occurred between that public hearings of January earlier this year, including the decision and where we find ourselves today, September 2022. And that refers to, firstly, that second last bullet, that following a Supreme Court of Appeal process and order, members and the public will recall there was this equity support of 69 billion. We've drawn down on 10 billion in the last financial year, which contributed to the 15% increase. And there was a remaining 59 billion that needs to be recovered. In that court decision, that is phased in effectively in equal tranches of 15 billion for the first 3 years commencing next financial year, and the last one in FY27 of 14 billion. And we'll demonstrate in this presentation how we brought it into account in terms of this revenue requirement application. And Chair, we also make a recommendation on the phasing of FY 2020's RCA of 3.4 billion. And the last one is per the MYPD methodology, it allows to update key assumptions between the time of the application and just before the decision is going to be made. So that's what we will highlight during today's presentation by myself. I think as many of us are aware that from an operations perspective, we will update around some key assumptions, and most importantly, it revolves around the supply options, the timing of that, and also the performance of the Eskom plant in particular. We know there's been some delays in terms of the phasing of the IPP bid windows, including, importantly, the risk mitigation plan. And also, we bring that into account in this update, and we'll highlight what has changed between January and September. And in terms of Eskom's own EAF performance, in January when we presented, our assumption was a 62% EAF. In this updated assumption, we're assuming a 59% EAF for FY24 and 25. Just to recap, that Medupi Unit 4 is earmarked to return to production in August 24, and we've also updated that schedule in terms of shutdowns for all the respective units. And what has changed also between January and now, Kusile Unit 5 has been brought forward by about 6 months from December 23 to June 23. So that will all come through in obviously the underlying production plan and what it means in terms of the implications in terms of costing of those options. So Chairperson and members, we did, and this slide effectively compares the latest assumptions that's Eskom has available to itself, on which we built these amendments as at September 22, and we compared this to what we presented at the public hearings in January 2022. So taking the sales volume, what we do see is a 1.1 terawatt hour increase between January to September. But when you look at that in the next financial year, there is then a reduction of about half a terawatt hour, 479 gigawatt hours. What does it mean in terms of the primary energy costs from an Eskom perspective? In total, there's an increase of 6.4 billion rand, and we'll explain a bit more on that later in the presentation. And for FY25, it then grows by 10.7 billion compared to the forecast that we provided in January 2022. Chairperson, we have not changed any of our operating costs compared to our original application. There were no changes also in January, and we've maintained that. We have also, from an Eskom application perspective, we have not changed the depreciation that is included in this allowable revenue, as Eskom maintains that its regulatory asset base is valid, and we still defend that position. We have also, from an Eskom perspective, I think it's important that when stakeholders are commenting and when NERSA makes their decision, we have taken principles from year one's decision into account and have then made the necessary adjustments. Members will recall that there's been no allowance for rear debts in FY23, and then we've then reduced our rear debts from what we had in our application of 6.5 billion in FY24, and similarly 7.1 in 2025, and we've reduced that to zero in line with the principle taken by NERSA's decisions to not burden the rest of the consumers in terms of municipality non-payment. And following the Minister of Finance speech in February, the deductions that Eskom can now claim is extended to December 2025. So our understanding of that is that Eskom won't be liable for carbon taxes in these 2 financial years. And then similarly, Chairperson and members, we've made those 10 billion rand reductions in terms of carbon tax in line with the announcement during the budget of February. So if we move on then in terms of what does this all mean compared to the information we submitted in January 22, this is just a summary of the impact in terms of the allowable revenue in terms of Eskom application and which items have changed and which have not changed. Without repeating what I've said, I think the first and foremost, what is important is the total allowable revenue before RCAs and court orders. You will see in January 2022 for FY24, the 334.7 billion remains exactly the same in September 22, and similarly the 365.2 billion. So as a total allowable revenue, there is no change from our Eskom perspective. However, the variance analysis column demonstrates where the significant movements have been between January and September. Just to read out a few, because I've got a bit more detailed slides later. But the big drivers there, Chairperson and members, one is the primary energy, and we'll come back to that. 2 is international purchases, for example, growing by 4 billion compared to what was assumed in January 22. And then the IPPs, in terms of timing and phasing, initially it will decrease by just about 2 billion in FY24 and then increased by 5.6 billion in FY25. And then similarly, just to reiterate what we've done on the carbon tax and the real debts, those have been reduced and taken out. Chairperson, what we also do, you will see the court order coming through of the 15 billion. And secondly, as I've indicated, we made an assumption that the 3.4 billion RCA for FY 2020 is phased in 50% over the next 2 years, 1.7 billion and 1.7 billion. So when we then look at this allowable revenue and taking into account the FY23 decision, Chairperson, you then will compare the cost assumptions or the cost allowances that were determined for FY23, and then you compare that to what is sitting in the application periods for 24 and 25. For example, if I read the top primary energy amount, NERSA allowed 80.5 billion rand in FY23. There's an increase to just under 102 billion from 23 to 24, and then it grows from the 102 billion in 24 to 104 billion. What you will also see, for example, operating costs, as we've indicated, we have not changed our application, but if you compare it to the NERSA decision that's embedded in the 9.6% that was awarded, the operating costs that Eskom is asking for is 63.1 billion compared to 62.5 billion, and then it increases to 65.8 billion. What you also see by maintaining our asset base, the depreciation would grow from 42 billion to 71 billion and then 74 billion. Chairperson and members of the panel, what we then do, and importantly, as we now busy with the separation of and unbundling of this industry, we've now then broken down their total allowable revenue and expressed it in terms of the three licensees, being generation, transmission, and distribution. I think what one will see, firstly, if I highlight at the bottom, in our proposal, Chairperson and members, the court order of the 15 billion, we propose that that be split between the network businesses of transmission and distribution, and the RCAs as well. The intention there is to at least migrate transmission and distribution closer to the cost reflective levels, and then we can, as an industry, subsequently address the issues around generation, Chairperson, and we'll go into more detail on that. Similarly, then, as I've indicated, you can see the allocations for the court order and the RCA to transmission's allowable revenue, as well as to distribution. If I then go and express what does the increase in allowable revenue mean to the consumer from an average perspective, it reflects a 32% increase from FY23's 9.6% decision. But the graphic bar graph shows there are three big contributing factors, and even the table highlights that. 10.7% of the increase of 32% is linked to the growth in depreciation, and that's effectively maintaining the regulatory asset base that Eskom has submitted originally, and then the corresponding depreciation, which is linked to that asset base. And obviously, once it's adjusted in FY24, you can see then the impact in FY25 is a 1% increase. Secondly, as IPPs, now remember from NERSA's decision in FY23 to FY24, that contributes 9% to the 32%, And then Eskom's own primary energy contributes 7.7% to the 32%. Chairperson, you will see that the RCAs and the court order in total contribute only 1%, because members will recall in the 9.6% decision, there was already embedded RCA decisions of about just under 14 billion in the 9.6%. So you're only expressing the movement from that 14 billion to the total of 16.7. And then the other contributing factors are relatively much smaller. There is an increase in international purchases and then the reduction in the carbon taxes. That's just highlighting that our operating cost is not growing year on year, an average 2.6% increase in terms over the next 2 years compared to the NERSA decision. If I just spend a little more time on what are the big contributing factors in terms of primary energy, from a coal perspective, the green bars is the rand amount that was included in the information in January, and the blue bars is now the latest update to September. You will see that our coal cost is decreasing in the first year and the second year. So coal cost decreases, yet the production from coal does increase, because we do see that the rand per ton in terms of coal that we are acquiring is decreasing in terms of our contracts, as well as some of the driving factors, because when we've signed these contracts, it was much favorable conditions. And secondly, utilization of these coal plants are higher, so they do produce a little more in terms of gigawatts. The big contributing factors to the growth of Eskom 7.8% in primary energy. Number one being OCGTs, based on the EAF of 59%. You can see that in January, we had an average load factor of 5% assumed. Now the load factor on these diesel plants are 12%. And coupled with that, the oil prices in terms of the commodities linked to the issues in terms of what the oil markets have done following the Russia-Ukraine environment has contributed significantly. So just on OCGTs, volumes goes up by 60%, but price contributes 40%. And similarly, in terms of startup gas and fuel oil, there's a significant increase there from 3 billion to 3.1 billion in January to 6.8 billion now in September. And similarly, that follows in FY25, with the volume contribution in FY24 being a growth of 26%, but the price impact of 74%. And similarly, you can see the split between volume and price in FY25. As I've indicated, IPPs have decreased in the first year, but increased in the second year. And we're also taking into account some of the levers mentioned in the energy crisis program, based on the assumptions that we have to date. International purchases increases on the back of contractual requirements that comes through in those numbers. Chairperson, just to have a look at the regulatory asset base based on FY23, NERSA's allowance for generation, which Eskom has reviewed, and we're busy with that process. For generation, we were awarded 31% of what we applied for, the 313 compared to the 1 trillion. On the network businesses, much closer to Eskom's value of the asset base, with the transmission around just under 90% of Eskom's value, and distribution 94% of our value. So, Chairperson, our proposal, especially around the allocation of the 15 billion and 3.4 billion, how it's split, will effectively result on the network sides. So just the normal returns as per the regional application would have left transmission with a return of 2.1 billion, which represents about 1.7% of its asset base. But by allowing the recovery to be linked substantially, well, only to the networks, it then pushes up the returns that transmission would get and distribution. So come FY24, transmission's return on assets would be 8.65% expressed as a percentage of its RAB, and 8.71 in 25. And similarly, distribution would go to 6.8 and 6.25. I believe why this is important, as we're busy with the unbundling process and in terms of the sequencing, it's important to reflect a sufficient revenue stream to deal with the requirements that are much needed in transmission as well as distribution. And also, as Eskom is seeking lender consent, one of the key questions is, can you demonstrate the revenue stream that will come from these businesses? We think this will be a positive signal to the market, and therefore, I think even going forward, then the network businesses should not be a burden on the fiscus going forward, and then leaving us as an industry to address the requirements and the challenges of the generation business. And also it demonstrates that the methodology can get to a cost-reflective level within a very short period of time for the networks. Chairperson, in terms of why this is important, following the allowable revenue, I think similarly in what we're proposing to try to close the gap on cost-reflective channels for the networks in the decision that NERSA will make for this application, Eskom has submitted a tariff plan that NERSA has to adjudicate on, and there are some key principles that we have requested that NERSA consider and to make a decision on. And I think similarly, like the strides that we can make on the network businesses, it's important to address issues in terms of the tariff structures. My recollection is the last time that Eskom has amended the tariff structures was as far back as 2012. So there's an important part to address fixed costs and variable costs, to address the issue of volume risk as well, to take into account, and more importantly, to make the cost of supply and service studies reflected in the tariffs. So here's an important opportunity that the industry should also take, also linking to the changing industry and the unbundling process in terms of transmission, distribution, and generation. Chair, just to remind the audience, cost reflectivity is one element that will contribute to Eskom's financial viability. I refer to them as the 4 key pillars. But over and above that, yes, Eskom must address its own cost base and be efficient in terms of delivering its service to the consumer. It's also very important that we do collect whatever revenues are billed in terms of our cash flows. Currently, our municipal arrears is sitting at about 50 billion rand, so that is unsustainable. And last but not least, in terms of our balance sheet and our debt structure, 400 billion cannot be serviced by Eskom solely through the tariffs. We are in discussions with government, National Treasury, and the shareholder to make a decision around the 400 billion debt stock. But just to illustrate that if you just do a debt relief, whether it's 150 or 200 billion, and you don't address the issue of cost reflectivity, collecting from the Munich Eskom being itself cost efficient, what you will do from a cash flow perspective is create a runway of about 3 to 4 years in terms of reprieve, but the debt stock will then start building up as we continue with our operating requirements and our capital requirements across the three entities. And before we know it again, Eskom would find itself again at a situation of 400 billion debt stock, which is unsustainable. So, Chair, in summary, what does the presentation say? I think firstly, from our own costs, I've highlighted it's not increasing significantly. The big drivers obviously being primary energy, substantially OCGTs and fuel oil, but also bringing into account the IPPs. We've taken in the principles and the decisions of year one in removing carbon taxes as well as the rear debts. We maintain our RAB, which we have reviewed, and obviously that then creates this necessary requirement in terms of the depreciation allowance. And I think there's an opportunity for the regulator to at least help put the network business on a sustainable path in terms of the returns that they can generate going forward with the allocation of the court order in the manner that Eskom has proposed, plus the RCA. I think that will give a positive signal to many stakeholders out there from wherever you're looking at it. And as I've reiterated, it's important that all these elements do contribute to Eskom's financial sustainability. And more importantly, they contribute within a short period of time. This cannot be dragged out over years. Otherwise, we will continuously have to go back to government and to make good the shortfall, depending on which lever isn't contributing. Chairperson, I thank you for the time, and to the members.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kasim. I would just then like to take this opportunity to give members an opportunity to ask questions, any questions of clarification, and if there's some specific information that the members would actually appreciate to have it presented. I would also request you, Mr. Kasim, just to take pen and paper and be able to note the questions as we go along. And after all the panel members have asked their questions, then you will be given an opportunity to respond. Where you cannot respond in detail, you already know that we give you time to then respond in writing to the energy regulator. I see Mr. Pugula's hand is up. I'll give Mr. Pugula an opportunity then to ask questions. Mr. Pugula, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. I have just one question. I wanted to just confirm the number that Khalib gave of the EAF that they have assumed in the table where he was giving the changes to the different years, what they have assumed, and I think it's a table that has the increase in the OCGT usage with the 60-40 split. But I think if you can give an indication of the EAF that has been assumed. I think he mentioned the number. I just couldn't hear what the number was. Thank you, Mr. Mkhize. That's the only question I have.
Thank you very much. Advocate Chole, over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you to Mr. Kasim for his presentation. I just have, I think, 3 questions. The first one is considering the amount required by Eskom and also taking into account the other amounts from previous decisions and as well as the court orders. Does he think, or what does he think? Is this not a burden to the economy and the electricity customers? If he can just indicate that. And the other question is, what is it that Eskom is doing to address the current, or rather the load shedding tide, which is having a negative impact on all of us, and taking into account the amount that they are requesting again And Chair, some of us will also be load shared in a few minutes as I speak. And the last one is just to find out as to what Eskom, or rather with Eskom having been cited on a number of occasions as having been exposed to corruption. I just want to find out as to what mechanisms has Eskom put in place to avoid the recurrence or the continued of the resources of Eskom. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Advocate Chole. Let me also just ask a few questions to you, Mr. Kassim. I will start off where my colleague ended on the issue of corruption. We just want to know if there's any update regarding the reclaiming whatever losses might have arisen as a result of decisions that were taken. We always say that we'll then have to take those into cognizance as they. Regarding that is the first one. Regarding but I'd just like to know if you may please confirm that there is an update from the figures that were there in January, where you've got a slight increase in 2024, then a decrease in 2025. From your side, before we even look about Busile units 5 and 6 for commercial operation dates of 30th June 23 and 30, to know that those units come into commercial operation are not included in the you are using OCGTs in slide 13, and I'm saying why should if you could just explain as to why should consumers pay for the OCGTs that cost more than your EAF doing it for 50% of the time, you know. So with that tap oil, effect energy would then go down alongside sales. Why it goes to transmission and distribution? Isn't the future of transmission more secure when compared to generation? I'd just like to get to understand that, because one would think that the bulk of the problems, yes, I understand PP is coming in and all that, but they will still use the transmission network as well as a large chunk of distribution. So in that manner, one would say that whatever is built fits into that of cost reflectivity and working on debt relief proposals. I would appreciate that you then at a technical level there is early engagement staff members, so that how these things are treated is dealt with very early, and we don't end up with a situation then happened. I really would appreciate that that kind of an engagement. I leave it at that now. I don't know if there are any other questions. I saw your hand was up, Advocate Tole. If you can just pose your questions, and then I gave Mr. Kassim an opportunity to respond.
Chair, just one last one that I missed in Sim's presentation, and in terms of the verbal presentation that he made. However, there are some elements that are indicated as having changed, and those that have been removed, and there are others that have not changed. So I'm missing the understanding in terms of why at the end they remain, or rather the allowable revenue requested, it's still the same. If you can just say that for me, maybe I may have missed him in his explanation of the reason why there is no change in allowable revenue. However, there are elements that have been changed, that have been removed, that have changed, and those that have moved, and those that have remained the same. I may have missed him. If you can just simplify or repeat what he had said. Thank you.
Thank you, Advocate. Over.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, members. I'll start with my response. To Mr. Bakula, the EF assumption is 59%. I think Mr. Nkize also confirmed that. But then move on to Advocate Sitoli's questions. The first one relates to this 32% burden on, firstly, at the end of the day, we in this allowable revenue application are demonstrating that the big cost changes, firstly what we're really in control of, and the big drivers being, number one, obviously, and I'll go into more detail around OCGT and those drivers and to fuel oil. Those are the significant ones, obviously, of the delays and when those will come in, plus the cost, so that's embedded. And we made some assumptions following the energy crisis around the IPPs. But at the end of the day, to answer these, this is what's required in order to not put a further burden on effectively what is not recovered through the electricity tariff. Effectively, what is not recovered through the electricity tariff, we then as Eskom have to approach and they have to then deal with and support us to meet these commitments in terms of the 400 billion with the equity that we're currently getting. We're trying to demonstrate in that allocation. Let's try to make businesses of transmission and distribution no longer be a burden on their own feet, generate enough revenue. Transmission needs to spend about 130 billion, and then find ourselves in the situation where transmission is then over-levered and then has a poor credit rating as it becomes its own entity, and similarly to distribution. And that is why the proposal in to fix 2/3 of the industry now, and then generation has a lot of issues to address, and we can work on that. But if we can remove the burden in the networks from the fiscus, I think that would be a choice. It's a choice between the electricity consumer, as I've indicated in terms of the financial sustainability, those pillars. If all four elements don't contribute, Eskom will remain and look to government to then balance the books in terms of requirements. In terms of load shedding and how we're addressing, the board is meeting on a daily basis to get a status update for all the power station managers and even our group executive for generation and the COO at the power stations. So even the support structures are trying to support generation to arrest the load shedding as quick as possible. Chairperson, in terms of the technicalities on that, I'll get my colleague to present a bit more in tomorrow's session. I'm not going to talk around the technicalities, but just be reassured it's a key priority and it's all hands on deck in terms of load shedding. With regard to corruption, from our perspective as Eskom, it is a priority. We are taking the recommendations of the Zondo Commission. We've got a separate subcommittee that's looking at it. We're working through the energy crisis work streams as well from a security perspective and initiatives of intelligence to the chair has raised. We will look in terms of how much corruption did we recover since the last time we have included it into any of the applications in terms of recovery, and we support the principle as and when Eskom recovers, it must then be passed back to the consumer. So Chair, we'll look at that between the last recoveries. If there's an amount that can be taken into account that we've recovered to reduce this allowable revenue, in this decision, we will present that to yourselves in writing. And obviously the principle is anything subsequently recovered, we will put through in terms of the RCAs. But it is a key focus areas, and we're working with all the different law enforcement agencies to address that. And as part of that, making use, Mr. Mkhize, the chair, also raised that. I think firstly, all the elements relating to the production side are adjusted, and just the return on assets up or down to maintain the allowable revenue. I think it's very important in terms of that it doesn't change. I think the last one, obviously, through subsequent RCAs and court decisions, you have to bring that into account. So those are the only amounts that then affect the allowable revenue. If I then move on, I explained the issue on corruption, and we will come back in writing and trying to identify any other recoveries that can be taken into account in your final determination. The issue of why we keep the allowable revenue, the assumptions of EAF and the utilization of the fleet. We assume with the high OCGTs and the IPP productions, as well as that we will meet that demand, that is assumed. Load shedding, we do address it as and when we do RCAs, because we have the actual amount, and then we deduct that in terms of whatever revenue is recovered in the RCA process. We are forecasting forward for the next year, 2 years, assumptions in terms of supply and demand balance based on those load factors, as well as in the corresponding costs. If I move on to the RAB and the units that are not producing, in our RAB application, whichever units were not producing have complied with the assessment of the regulatory asset base, and that is the basis on which we have reviewed your determination in the first year. If we then move on to coal and OCGTs, yes, I think at the end of the day, my understanding is, as a last resort, Eskom must utilize even its OCGTs to reduce the impact of interruptions, because the cost to the economy, as we all well aware, is far greater than the cost of using these diesel plants. Yes, we would like to operate and have more production from the much cheaper technologies, but the ones that are funding, and if the technology allows, together with the global prices, which come through as a pass-through element, that necessitates mandate that efficient recovery. I think, as I've highlighted, is everyone understands what has happened with oil prices around between January and where we're sitting now, and that factor from 5% to 12%. Similarly, also address more detail to the regulator members on those particular items. In terms of maintenance, Chairperson, I think firstly, we really appreciate the decision in FY23 and the 9.6. That has allowed all the maintenance that Eskom has requested across the 3 divisions. We are definitely spending that maintenance and even more. But my little understanding from a technical perspective, on the generation side, these plants are on average over 40 years old. Yes, the maintenance is fixing whatever we can see, and then those plants return and run for a little while. But then other elements break down. Let's also acknowledge some of the work that we do has to be repeated for whatever reason. And I think fundamentally the problem is we have not had the opportunity as Eskom to do midlife crisis maintenance, midlife refurbishment maintenance, which is much more significant than the maintenance that we are currently doing. And that's why we find by utilizing this plant quite hard, we see much more frequent unplanned breakdowns. In terms of sales and Chairperson, in FY25, the drop in sales and primary energy increased. I think members must understand It's not a 1:1 relationship. Obviously, there's a massive contribution from the different mix. That mix comes into account, and obviously the cost drivers in terms of rates that then get taken into account. But we can also similarly provide the detail in writing to explain and answer that question, Chairperson. On the returns, I think I've touched and explained why. Let's take the opportunity to get the networks on a sustainable business. For example, if we maintain the current approach where this 15 billion is split proportionately between transmission and distribution and generation, on average, the returns will go up from the 1.7, and we can do the numbers, maybe to about 2.7. But what do you achieve out of that? You still have 3 unsustainable businesses and entities. Let's solve 2 of the 3 in terms of the industry, and then we will address the generation business. Because I think first and foremost, to compare the cost reflective return on assets, we got to fix and agree on the regulatory asset base. We were awarded 31% compared to our value. That is too significant to address and quantify the gap to cost reflectivity. Plant that are retired, we do take that into account, and we can also follow up that with detailed writing. Chairperson, your last question, definitely agree with you. As and when through National Treasury and government decisions are made on the debt relief, we will definitely engage not only ourselves but with National Treasury to yourselves directly when decisions are made on debt relief. But just to reiterate, the process is still ongoing and there are no firm decisions. Thank you, Chairperson. I hope I've covered the majority of the questions that were asked. And I have committed with the others we will respond in writing, and my colleague will present a little more around the generation performance, load shedding, etc. tomorrow at the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kasim, for the responses. Let me hear from members of the panel if there are any follow-up questions. Noting also that you have given you opportunity to respond in writing to further enhance your responses that you provided today. I take it that there are none. In your responses that you are going to be submitting in writing, Mr. Kasim, as well as in the subsequent public hearings, please do reflect on the government as a shareholder being able to then come in and assist, instead of saying that if it's not done by the consumers, it will then have to be through the fiscus. Whereas the one would maybe ask the question as to why should it be consumers in the first place if it's actually what the shareholder needs to, it's a cost that should be borne by the shareholder. So look into that, and that the shareholder will also even have maybe even a much broader space to get those monies generated. I would just ask you that you zoom into that, and also to clearly outline the principles used to exclude units from the RAB. 12 months, some would argue, for example, that it is too long when one considers where the EAF is, because now it's now running at 59% that you highlighted. So please let's just look at those principles, so that or principles or criteria, and then be able to engage on those criteria, such that what we come up with is what is reasonable and prudent. Also, when it comes to the oil prices that you highlighted, if the EAF was high enough, one would not be using those OCGTs or having to use the startup oil to, in the first place. So please, in subsequent presentations, talk exactly to that argument. We'll appreciate it. And again, when it comes to the objective principle of allocating the 15 billion from RCA court order to transmission and distribution, I understand that you want to solve that, but are there any other principles that inform that? I think it would be important, because you will still have a generation that then hops along after all this has been done in terms of restructuring. I would give you an opportunity to then respond to us in writing, as well as for you to keep your promise of subsequent presentations being able to accommodate the questions that were raised in this session. Having said that, maybe I would like you to comment on one thing, because I remain of the view that maybe we normally would do, in my experience with these public hearings, we would have a public hearing, then you would then adjust your presentation as new questions are being raised. But in this situation, you had an update that was outside of the process, and therefore to afford other people here to make submissions, and maybe to kind of allow a time of 14 days for them to respond instead of the normal 7, noting that some new information has come with as a result of the adjustment. Just your comment on that, sir.
Chair, I think it's important that stakeholders comment on this updated information that we have published and submitted today at the public hearings. I think it's important that they allowed an opportunity to comment on that. I think, Chair, obviously, following the decision of year 1, it would also be misrepresenting from Eskom's perspective, if based on the regional application of 20%, 15% and 10%, Eskom is sitting here today and saying the price increase we're asking for is 15% for year 2. Yet we know there's already a decision of 9.6% from year 1. And that is why the update is important, but also taking into account a court decision that the rest of the stakeholders must also understand and appreciate. So, Chair, I fully support that recommendation to allow members of the public to comment on it. And obviously those that have had the opportunity maybe to look at what we put on our website in trying to at least give them an opportunity in preparation of these public hearings, they're also welcome to comment. But I fully support, Chair. I think in terms of the court decision, NERSA has until Christmas Eve to make this decision. So I think there's sufficient time for the regulator to make the decision timelessly and to allow for that commentary period to be extended. So fully in support, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. So as not to be misunderstood, I was just talking about the 7 days that we normally give for people to submit comments after emanating from a public hearing, but just to make it 14 days instead of the 7 days. That is, yeah. But then thanks for your response from your side. I think now we can surge ahead in the next sessions, as well as written comments going directly to the energy regulator. This opportunity to invite Madam Francesca De Caspari from the Southern African Faith Communities Environmental Institute, giving her 20 minutes to present. I would just like to hear from you, Madam Francesca De Caspari, if you have got any objections in taking the oath.
No objection.
To get you to raise your hand and affirm the following. Do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole truth?
I solemnly declare.
State your name, company, and designation therein.
My name is Francesca de Gasperis. I'm the Executive Director of SAFC, the Southern African Faith Communities Environment Institute. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. It's 14:18 now. You've got your 20 minutes. Go ahead and present.
Thank you so much. And thank you for this opportunity, and good afternoon to everyone here. I want to for the opportunity. Public entities or civil society coming to comment. And I wonder if that's because they, why they haven't come, and if they, like me, link to you and share my contribution. But otherwise, because the current load shedding, I wouldn't be able. Just to start, I would like to just let you know a little bit about my organization. SAFC is the Southern African Faith Communities Environment Institute. We're a multi-faith organization, and we're committed to supporting faith communities and commitment to energy justice, sustainable living, and to address the impacts of climate change. Over the years, we've submitted many written comments, as well as attending hearings on behalf of the faith communities we represent, and sometimes alongside them to NERSA around this issue of the affordability of electricity tariffs. And we keep seeing year on year huge excessive tariff increases. And our submission today says we believe that the current methodology, the revenue application process, is the main reason why we keep seeing these unacceptable future tariff increases and the current one. And we believe that the methodology that is being used needs to be revised because it does not reflect the reality of what we're facing. It also doesn't reflect the reality even at Eskom around its unreliable fleet, its huge debt burden, as we've heard previously, and also that it's just not fair or fit as a model in which to make calculations around tariff increases. We cannot, as a country, afford this kind of electricity price increase year on year. And we really need ethical leadership, not just from NERSA, but from all the government departments that are involved in energy procurement and energy planning. We do need a just energy transition. And I see that the carbon tax being removed is spoken of as a benefit in terms of the revenue calculations, but actually it's exactly the opposite. It's a kind of a false saving, because ultimately the less change we make in our energy systems, the bigger impact it's going to have on consumers and on us all. So it will actually be more expensive if we don't start taking into consideration the real and urgent needs of climate change. So I've already mentioned my concern about the lack of public engagement, and I'm not sure whether it's because people have become disillusioned with this process and feel they aren't going to be heard, or whether, you know, they've seen how, and this was mentioned a few times in the presentation by the gentleman from Eskom, the 15 billion we got from the court case. And that is really disturbing because really that's the public's money, and it's being used to balance the books of Eskom, and that really isn't what this exercise should be about. So I'm going to make some comments on the revenue application about some of the things that I've observed, but remember, I'm not an accountant, and some of these calculations are extremely complicated. So I really want to speak to the principles and what we understood from it. It looks this shift towards a cost supply model to be a reasonable business practice and to be more equitable. But in reality, the legacy of mismanagement and corruption at Eskom with this frail fleet that we see keeps breaking down and burdening us with the debt really makes it not efficient. And so it's not a fair or efficient way of calculating tariff increases. And we cannot support this kind of huge increase. We see that Eskom goes to great length to show how it will use the funds that it's won back, and also its asset calculations to show how it's going to relate to the breakdown of the aging fleet. But from our side, this sort of complex capital and operational expenditure way of, it is something that needs to be considered, absolutely. But from our perspective, Eskom were a viable concern that was providing a real public service, it would not ignore the fact that its increases are unaffordable by the consumers, and it would not ignore the fact that its services are unreliable. And the fact that the board is meeting is commendable, but it's really not enough. We need to see something much more seriously being done. And I hope perhaps when the president gets back after the Queen's funeral, we'll see something like that, but I'm not holding my breath. I know I heard in some of the debates recently on the radio that Vietnam brought 9,000 megawatts onto its grid through rooftop solar. And if we saw that kind of commitment from our energy suppliers, I'm sure we could see our energy crisis being addressed much more quickly, and these kinds of costs not having to be passed on to the consumer. So the fact that these issues, these very serious issues of climate change, of the aging fleet, of the debt are being externalized and passed on to the consumers is just unacceptable. And it's important to recognize that Eskom is not a private company. It is, the government is its sole shareholder, and as a state-owned entity, Eskom should implement government policy. And we're not seeing that. We're seeing a calculation that's coming from accounting, not government policy. So we don't see things like the National Development Plan coming into consideration. These are the kinds of principles that we should be seeing. We should be seeing much more attention being paid to provision for low-income households and small businesses to really help our country to get out of the hole that it's in due to load shedding and an unreliable energy system. So there's many things that we think that need to be looked at much more seriously. And this includes the social compact to reduce poverty and inequality, raising employment and investment, a strategy to address poverty and its impacts by broadening access to employment and strengthening the social wage, providing public transport and raising rural incomes. And all of this can be done, and Eskom has a really important role to play here. We also believe that steps by the states to professionalize the public service, to strengthen accountability, improve coordinating, and prosecute corruption are absolutely critical. And those are all from the NPD's executive summary. So those are principles that the government has stated are its own. And we can see that the current planning and strategies around tariff increases have no reflection of that and no consistency towards those kinds of principles. It really does seem to be an accountant's calculation in total. So they're also not consistent with the intention of the MYPD method to ensure reasonable tariff stability, smooth changes over time, consistent with socioeconomic objectives of the government. Key socioeconomic objectives of the government expressed in the ERA are universal access to energy and enabling economy, and we're just not seeing any of that. So our current energy crisis, both in its supply and affordability, has roots in the failure of government. And the government departments, I would like to name them if I may. That includes the failure of the DMRE to timelessly promote renewable energy generation instead of being distracted by nuclear energy, unaffordable car power ships, as well as gas and oil exploration. The failure of Treasury in collaboration with COGTA and SALGA to revise the free basic energy system so that indigent households do receive the energy that they should be receiving, so that you keep those customers rather than losing them. The failure of a number of relevant government agencies to deal with the ongoing corruption impacting Eskom, which is spoken about by Eskom themselves. The failure of a solution to Eskom's crippling debt, and the failure of law enforcement to deal with rampant electricity theft. And considering the scale of the problem that we're facing and how it's impacting our energy generation, this should have a dedicated unit towards it. And also an appreciation of the complexity of the entire electricity supply system and the difficult role of NERSA. With appreciation for that, we also do believe that NERSA should be using its muscle more to really not allow it to be taken to court in order to claw back important monies that it's tried to save from Eskom. So yeah, in conclusion, I would say that we really want to challenge Eskom. Now is the time to move towards the just energy transition. No more externalization of carbon tax or any of these. These are not cost savings, as I said earlier. The just energy system requires us all to act in a new way. and to be involved in a much more effective way of generation, distribution, and consumption with new methodologies for subsidy of electricity and energy alternatives to poor household and small businesses. This is absolutely crucial for the future of South Africa. This energy transformation is essential for a viable economy and therefore the well-being of all. So we do want to suggest that we need a revised integrated resource plan so we can move forward and signal the policy change that we need around renewable energy, revise the ERA to acknowledge the role of technologies in providing efficiency and reduce the demand at peak need, and also look at more public-private partnerships and community-private partnerships in energy generation. We want the government to look seriously at Eskom's debt. Eskom's debt is crippling us, especially as long as it's continued to allow to pass that on to us in these unacceptable tariff hikes. And setting much stricter technical compliance standards for outsourced maintenance and equipment so that incompetent maintenance companies are not appointed based on a score, but rather about what is efficient for us in terms of revenue and maintenance. And for nurses to set up a forum to facilitate intergovernment solutions. So we actually really seriously, collectively look at this issue of unaffordable electricity to municipalities and others. We want to see much more attention paid to the free basic energy allocation as well as a social wage so that we really do see people being able to move out of poverty and that Eskom receives some of that revenue as well. And then finally, we want to see cost accounting measures put into place at the local authority level that addresses bad debt to Eskom to ensure a clean and transparent administration. We see some of that is part of the calculation that we are receiving as consumers, and that needs to stop. And then finally, improve law enforcement so that we have a dedicated unit to stop electricity theft and vandalism. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present this afternoon. I know I spoke very quickly, and I hope it was understandable, and I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Kasparis. You did save us a few minutes, which we desperately need. Please then take this opportunity to just note any questions that may be posed by the members of the panel. I would then like to give you members an opportunity to ask any question by show of hands. Advocate Stole.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thanks to the presenter for her presentation. Just one question. At the beginning, she mentioned that the methodology used needs to be revised to address the realities that we are faced with in the country. So I just wanted to get an understanding from her, how can this methodology be revised in the presenter's view? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Advocate. Madam Kasparis, I think whilst you're responding to the question, also note that the process of relooking at the methodology is underway, and therefore just to also bring to attention to also supplement whatever response you may give with the written comments in terms of what is not right with this methodology, what can be improved and how, where possible. You also indicated that there's a frail aging fleet of Eskom plants, but you have also said you don't support these huge increases. I'd just like to know what is it that you've identified as needing improvement? Just quickly in brief form to say this and that and that. Noting that you have actually laid a lot of blame on other institutions, and what is it that Eskom then itself you think needs to do? I would just like to hear from you. That's all. Thank you from my side.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity and thank you for the question. the questions from you and Advocate Sotole. Thank you. I would like to respond in writing, but just briefly at this point, you know, oftentimes, and we see this right across the world in many circumstances when we look at the way things are calculated, methodologies often, there's what they call the externalities. And these are often, you know, we are an environmental institute, so we often look at how the environment is externalized. I think we're also seeing that climate change has been externalized. The needs of the consumer have been externalized. If Eskom was a company that wanted to make itself as attractive as possible to consumers and competitive, then it would need to find a balance between what it needs internally, how it structures its own debt, and what it asks for from the consumers. Because at the moment, it's losing customers from the top of the financial brackets who can afford to get their own you know, renewables put on their roofs or find other inverter power supplies, and those who just simply cannot afford electricity at all anymore. So it's losing customers. And I think that's something that should come into its calculations. I also think it needs to look at the risks associated with the impact in terms of reliability of energy as the climate worsens, and what that means. Because it is a government institute, it should think in terms of what is its role to play in what the government says it's going to supply. So I think those are different aspects that I would suggest that are included in the methodologies. And there are ways to do that. You know, the way insurance companies have brought in things like climate risk, the way that private businesses look at what is affordable. So you look at the general economy and you reflect on what's possible. I also think that Eskom should be taking a much more proactive role, and I may be wrong, so I could be corrected, in terms of how it's seeking to address its own debt. You know, these are discussions, I'm sure, between different government departments, and really the process seems to be taking altogether too long. I do feel a little bit like Groundhog Day with some of the issues that we present here, because they are the same year on year. The urgency is lacking. We do not see even going to manage to address Eskom's debt. So how do we make this a viable entity? And then you also asked, what did I think it should around its aging fleet? Well, in a way, Eskom is, you know, you can look at this as a huge problem, keeping on shoring up systems which are absolutely falling to pieces. Or you can say, what would be the most cost-effective, the quickest, and the most efficient way to bring energy onto the grid? And then start looking at, and you will see that renewable acid in and sped up much more quickly. So that's one of the ways that could be addressed. I'm not saying it will cover all the issues, but there are places that we could be moving much more quickly on, instead of having these sort of ongoing ideological battles about whether we're going to do business as usual energy procurement, or whether we're actually going to get quite visionary and address the impact of climate change. So I do think more could be done at Eskom. I do think they should be using their influence and talking to other government departments who may or may not be holding them back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Kaspari. We will await your responses in writing, giving you a 7-day period, but as we heard earlier on, we will extend it to 14 days, but still we will appreciate the earlier the better, whilst it's also fresh in your mind. That will greatly assist us. Thank you very much. We then take this opportunity to proceed to Madam Liz McDade from the Organizations Against Tax Abuse Outer, Western Cape.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair. I just need to share my screen.
Yeah, just wait a second. So that you'll be able to take the oath. Do you have any objections in taking the oath?
No, it's fine.
It's fine with you. Okay. Please raise your right hand and affirm the following. Do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole truth?
I do, to the best of my abilities.
Thank you. For the record, please state your name, company or organization, and designation therein.
Liz McDade from OUTA, the Organisation Undoing Tax Abuse, and I'm the Parliamentary and Energy Advisor.
Thank you very much. You may proceed with your presentation, ma'am. You've got the 20 minutes. It's 14:38 now. Please proceed.
Don't I have extra time because the SAFC didn't take up all theirs? Okay. What I just need to know from you is what do you see and whether you're seeing the presentation and presentation style or on the side, Chair.
It's the right format, Liz.
Yeah, it seems
Okay.
it's in the presentation mode.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Okay.
I do want to start off expressing my condolences about Dennis Miller. That's quite sad. And also to reflect on the fact that this was supposed to be a physical situation, hearing, but now that we are still stuck on the computer, and I hope that going forward we'll get out of that mode. And part of that is, I think, also related to the process. Oh, let me just say, for those of you who don't know, this is OUTA. So we are about trying to hold government to account. And we've been involved in the energy sector. Many of you know me with other hats as well, but we have been involved in various energy-related submissions. And while just ordinary members of the public, I think we've become familiar with this process, which is, I think, quite complex to ask the public to comment on. So I just want to start off with a process. So basically, we don't have to, Eskom appears to sort of be on its knees. It's overrun the diesel budget, I hear, and the people that are bearing the burden is us, South Africans, small businesses, households, etc. And yet, for more money. And what concerns me, Chairperson, is why only 6 people have anything to say. I understood. I think there's six people that want to present other than Eskom. So why is this? Why is it not 50 million people? So I do think that NERSA, I would say that it is something that you would need to address, is because you cannot really claim that people gave input, that you have really consulted with the public. And maybe you need to relook at how you're advertising, but not only that, but how are you asking people to comment? And I would suggest that there's a need to engage in a way that people can understand. Everybody, well, I don't think if you went and did a quick survey on the street, you would find anyone who said, of course, Eskom should get a more than 30% increase. That is just not going to happen. So these are factors to me that mean that the process is not working. So I was very interested to hear the committee members asking Eskom, and I thought it was maybe just me that I missed something. When I saw that we have 2 different tables, I looked for the piece of paper that goes with the tables that tells you what the changes are about. But there was no explanation. And when I asked NERSA, they said there's no additional information. And now I hear from the committee members that it seems there isn't an explanation that people can really understand. So how, if we don't have access to the information, can we comment meaningfully on what is going on? And I would say, but NERSA is the regulator, so why did NERSA not halt the public hearings, halt the process until we've got real information to comment on? So, and particularly for me, I see that the cost of primary energy and the cost of the IPPs have changed, and yet somehow the number of the total becomes exactly the same. Now, how do you do that? I mean, if I'm trying to balance my own books, I can't get the same numbers. Yet here you have real cost changes, supposedly, and yet you get the exact number, exact 6 digits, right? For 2 years, exactly the same. I'm sorry. That's, in my mind, if I used to be a maths teacher, that I would have immediately failed the person that they must be cheating. So how does this happen, and why do we not have real explanations for what's going on? Doesn't make one, you know, have some faith in Eskom. So then this issue of the returns, this is always a sticky one, and we always raise the same thing. So what are we sitting with at the moment is what we are understanding is that Treasury gives money to Eskom, and Eskom earns money and gives it back to Treasury, which then has to give it back to Eskom. And every time we have to pay. So why don't we stop pretending that Eskom is a business, that in any way profitable? And quite frankly, if government is the owner of Eskom and government knows that Eskom has no sense of being a profitable, so there's losses and gains in the numbers, but bottom line, this should be out the equation. And we also shouldn't be having any bonuses or Eskom. If it was running as a business, half of the management would be going with 0 salaries until such time as it was a going concern. So which way are we playing this? And then according to Eskom, price elasticity isn't really a problem, but because nobody has any other option. Well, I think it can afford it. You are putting up alternative means of generating electricity, and it's only the poor and the vulnerable that are stuck with Eskom. So what we are seeing now, and so maybe just highlighting, you know, nearly a third of children under the age of 5 are malnourished. So people are desperate. They need food, they need energy. We need to make this country work, and it means that Eskom needs to be playing its part. So the problem, I'm putting this thing at the bottom here, this is Eskom's response, that's somebody else's problem, and that they need to make electricity available, and they need. So now I just want to use one example. Primary energy costs are under severe pressure due to coal sourcing. So this is Eskom. And then they go on to talk about the need for cost plus mines, blah, blah, blah. So never mind the war and the price of gas and oil, but this was European countries imported more than 3 million tons of coal from South Africa, 40% more than the volume in 2021. Do we think mines going to export too? Are they going to just stick some on the side for Eskom, or is the price going to go up? Why are we still relying on coal, and what are we doing to move away from this? So we're stuck in this place, and when we look at what's happening with the power stations, for me, I said this to a colleague this morning, we've got to at some point take a decision that you can't, but because Eskom has this captive audience that it can just keep coming back for, it doesn't have to make those decisions. And so this little box is maybe we need to start thinking out of the box. Then if we go into the details, so this is where small thing, and Eskom needs to be asked to explain. So firstly, Eskom always looks at carbon costs and environmental costs as something outside the coal situation. Carbon costs are directly related to the coal fleet. Environmental costs are related to coal fleet, and they are an underestimate. We have the health costs. We have the fact that they don't even put in air pollution abatement because Why is it that we are now skewing? We're claiming that the IPPs are really expensive and the coal not so great, especially now we're just going to like toss the carbon tax out. But this is unrealistic and quite frankly manipulative, because what it is trying to do is try and pretend that IPP sells its power. It's including the cost of the people that are working in the factory or in the power station. The other thing is, if you look into the generation options and how they're described, I just picked this one up and was quite puzzled. So the nuclear costs, the diesel costs, in different ways, exchange rate. They're written the same. So I'm not an exchange rate expert, but it may be exchange rates. But no numbers are put into to calculate nuclear fuel, to calculate the diesel, the Brent oil link. That's not clear. So we can't say whether they're using the most expensive or the cheapest. But storage suddenly, 18 Rand to the dollar. So somewhat puzzled by that. I knew inflation was bad. The last 2 years, dollar-rand exchange rate. You can see for yourself, when did the exchange rate go over 18? So the question is, this is a forward planning document, and yet it has a very large exchange rate, dollar-rand exchange rate in it. And this was done in January, well, I guess last year, really. So what I did was, and just to hammer it home, 84% of Eskom's costs, according to its own numbers, are generation. And I just lumped a few of these costs I spoke about in terms of 84% of the general operating costs, etc. How much of the application is due to coal and the generation fleet? Should inform how we are going forward. So then another thing I noticed was the dead stop dates. Kubik doesn't seem to have one. Even though it expires in 2024, its license, and it wasn't, as far as I recall, there was nothing when it was built that said it's going to be going for 60 years or more. But so now there's been a decision, but based on what we don't know, that it's a good idea. What we have seen so far is the refurbishment wasn't able to take place because Eskom wasn't prepared. Were there penalties? There's now been delays in the return to service. The EAF is abysmal. So at what point do we try to understand how much is that refurbishment really going to take? How much maintenance is still going to happen because this is now an old car and potentially a very unsafe car management. So is it ever going to retrieve or earn enough to cover the costs of that grid? I don't have the answers. Then this regulatory asset base. So this is a question that came to mind. What are we basing the replacement on? In other words, are we saying the coal fleet cost of the asset base is to replace the coal fleet or to replace X amount of gigawatts on the system? So just throwing a few numbers in there, obviously we all know that coal going forward is very expensive, and yes, you will be forced to pay for environmental costs, and climate change is the big one in the room. So how is that regulatory asset base being determined? Which way around is it? Is it to replace coal or is it to replace the electrons? So just to information to provide an answer, so I'm in their assessing of Eskom. But I think we have to look at the others. So, and I think number B is not given enough impetus in decision making, and nor is number D. It is that universal access to electricity is not being supported by the interests of present and future generations are not being safeguarded. Certain generations are protected as well as current generations. So just to summarize, is how do we try and compare these things when we're not comparing apples with apples? So we need to understand how these costs are put together. We do need meaningful participation, and I think it's very difficult on the information that's provided for ordinary people to plow through 300+ pages of documentation. It's highly technical, but there must be a way of making it accessible so that people can understand what the consultation is about, state what kind of answers they can give. The shifting methodology, I'm just flagging that because I think we do need to change the methodology, but Alta's been trying to engage with the data because this is not an engagement, right? This is 10-15 minutes. We wanted to have an engagement. We can sit around the table and discuss it. We weren't able to attend the public hearings. Eskom will be addressed. So this is one of the key aspects where we are not seeing an incentive for Eskom to limit its costs and to make changes, because basically it doesn't have to. It just comes back to the regulator. So I think that's for us where there needs to be some clever thinking. But there needs to be space that we use the results of the RCR to inform this planning forward. And I can elaborate on that if I don't do it now. And then the other thing is not to reward something that was recovered or was identified for last year, and presumably there'll be more. So then maybe we must just take 5 billion off the MYPD. And if it turns out that they don't recover that much, well, a special plea, they could be given a bit more in the RCA. So again, load shedding and bad EAFs, they shouldn't be rewarded, because what we are not hearing from Eskom is what they are going to do, what their plans are to ensure that they pay for not doing load shedding, for load shedding. They pay for not providing electricity. So we shouldn't be rewarding them so they have opted to keep very expensive old power stations going rather than go for new ones. They have decided that they are going to carry on keeping the coal, and now they even want to build gas. And so what are we supposed to do as the customers? Are we just supposed to pay up? Because that is not fair. However, if we didn't have to pay when there was no delivery, and if we got compensated when things failed, maybe that would sit with the accountants in the boardroom would then start thinking about how they would get different solutions. So again, we have very specific, if you get no electricity. So maybe if there's an EAF of 65, well, everybody only pays 59% of that monthly fee. If your fridge breaks and your TV breaks and the local government's substation, well, Eskom must pay.
Please note that I've already given you 3 minutes extra. Just
okay.
For some reason.
All right, I'm at the end. So basically, I'm saying out the box. And I ended like that because if anybody knows, this is in, I think it's been in the media a lot, that basically rooftop solar, Vietnam managed to do a huge amount. Political will, we can do that. But I will stop there. Thank you very much, and thanks for the extra time. I don't need to have that slide.
Thank you very much, Madam McDade. I would just then give members of the panel an opportunity to ask any questions. You may keep your slide on there so that if maybe there's a reference to one slide,
okay.
It will assist. Members, Torofans, if you've got any questions, Okay, I don't see any hands raised. Means your presentation was well understood by members. I just got one question for you. On the slide on primary energy, which is over 40% more than the total volume. I just want to understand as to what then is the implication, or what are you trying to imply with that bullet, and talking specifically to this tariff application.
So okay,
Yeah.
so here's my soothsayer.
So sorry, just for a second, so you can just get all the questions. Also, you talk of the fixed cost payment that having to be aligned with EAF. To mean, I just wanted to get clarity whether you mean the connection cost from your side, as to why would you, what would be the basis of it being aligned to the EAF 1-on-1 being 59%, as long as EAF is 59%, just to get the clarity. And then noting also that you are also got the 14 days that you have attended it, so that you may also provide more inputs, noting the presentations that have already preceded yours. Advocate Stole, I see your hand is up now.
Yes, thank you, Chairperson. On slide, I think it's slide 18 that talks about principles. The presenter indicated that there are no incentives for Eskom to limit its costs. So I just wanted to ask her to give more clarity on that particular statement, and also give example of those incentives that she has in mind. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Advocate Stole. Madam McDade, you may respond, please. And as I said, you don't have to respond to everything in detail, as you are going to provide written comments.
So I'm going to start with the written comments, Chair. So one of the points I made is that Eskom didn't provide us with something that we could understand as to for the changes in the detail. So are we going to receive that in writing? Because I also heard the Eskom guy say he was going to talk about it tomorrow. But some of us have lives outside of Eskom, and we aren't able to come to every single public hearing. It would be not really be practical. So how can we receive that information? Because that's what I would use to comment back in the 14 days. So that would be my question. And then very quickly, the coal supply question, the implications for that is that I suspect that Eskom is going to come back and say that the coal prices went up somehow inexplicably, and more money. So that was my question on that. And then I think the cost limits and the EIF maybe would be similar, which I do apologize, it came late, but we did highlight some of the other things. So here I'll be saying, in terms of the EAF, and it could be anything we use, but I was just using like the national EAF. Maybe it would be related to that. But if you pay X amount per month, irrespective of whether you receive any electricity, during a time when load shedding is at stage 6 or stage portion of your electricity claim, which would enable me, in my simple way of saying, well, if Eskom's going to get penalized for not providing electricity, maybe that will incentivize them to actually provide electricity instead of sitting there and waiting for to come back to NERSA for the RCA. And having been here for many years, I can just say that it's quite frustrating to present the same thing over and over. And I know that you guys often end up sort of picking a number in the middle, and I'm sure you have good reasons for that. But I don't think that we are helping to solve the problem by simply going round in these circles, and Eskom's costs get more and more expensive. And just to say, I think it's also reckless for Eskom to assume there's zero carbon tax. That would just be fair to the government in terms of its environmental obligations. So I would suggest that that would be quite a reckless supposition for Eskom to make. But again, it begs the question is when they come back in the RCA and now say, sorry, we got a carbon tax, so now we want money to pay for it, will NERSA approve that, or will they say, well, you guys should have known of that before and therefore we're not giving it to you? Thank you. I think that would be. Thanks, Chair.
To receiving your written inputs. Eskom, in their response, they will also touch on the issue of availing information as already articulated by yourself.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, and to these sessions and making presentations. We please don't tire in doing that. We need Madam Gillian van der Merwe. Let me just check in terms of the program so that I don't mix people up. Oh, sorry, before Madam van der Merwe, I will call Mr. Jack Armour from the Free State Agriculture.
Yes.
Yeah, Madam McDade, if you may just unshare. Just help us to unshare. Thank you very much. And now we've got Mr. Jack Armour. Do you have any objections in taking the oath, Mr. Armour?
I have no objections.
Thank you very much. Please raise your hand and affirm the following. Do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give this panel is the truth and the whole truth?
I declare so.
For the record, please state your name, company or institution and designation therein.
I'm Jack Armour from Free State Agri.
Your designation therein?
I'm commercial manager at Free State Agri.
Thank you very much. You've got your 20 minutes. It's 15:11 now. Please go ahead and present.
Is my presentation showing?
Yes, it is. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity.
If you can just put it in presentation mode.
Oh, it's in presentation mode in front of me now. Sorry. Come on. Let's see if I can find it in presentation mode here. Is it in presentation mode now?
No, it's showing it like when you are still editing or working on it.
Is somebody that can quickly advise me of how I...
Mr. Jack, can you hear me?
Yes, I'm listening.
Yeah, click that tab at the
Proceed,
bottom.
proceed, Mr.
Press that button.
Which button?
The one at the bottom, where you put the mouse point on it.
Yeah. Is it in presentation mode now?
No, it's not. But continue, sir. You can able to see your presentation. Continue.
Okay. And if I move on to the next slide, can you see that?
You can see your slides. It would have been better if it was in the presentation mode, like if you press that camera like button at the bottom.
Sorry, I'm wasting time now. Shows, let's I use presenter view. I think that's what's happening. Let me try this now. Is that working?
Okay,
No, it's
maybe
not working.
just present, then just continue.
Okay. Can you see the introduction slide now in front of you?
Yes, we've got the slide, albeit not in presentation mode.
Okay, thank you very much. So who is Free State Agriculture? We have presented to NERSA almost every year. I share the concerns of the other viewers that number one, I think a quick disclaimer is I was expecting to do this presentation on Thursday, and I got the invitation this morning that I must do it today. So there's a bit of a rushed presentation without too much detail, but I'm doing the best I can. So who is Free State Agriculture? We are nearly 3,000 commercial farming entities based in the Free State. We represent these farmers and 5 other major, somebody's moving on my slides. Sorry, Gerard, you to control. So Gerald, let me just stick with that one, please. We represent nearly 3,000 commercial farming entities in the Free State, 5 major agribusinesses and various commodity associations. There are nearly 150 local farmers associations who make up our structures at the grassroots level. And these farmers associations play an active role in the local town, municipality, and the local economy of the local town. And they also have an influence over local municipalities through IDPs. So we are trying to empower our farmers associations to work with municipalities and to have an impact on the ability to pay for power, because I think that's where one of the biggest losses is the local municipalities that are not paying for their electricity. Furthermore, I know the first presenter this afternoon said direct clients of Eskom. They're not Eskom clients via a municipality. They buy their power directly from Eskom. And interestingly, we've picked up that the load shedding is very strict on the farmers, the direct clients of Eskom.
Just hold a second, Mr. Ama, please.
Yes.
Just a second. Mr. Matera?
Thank you, Chairperson. Mr. Jack, can you press the escape button on your keyboard?
Okay.
And then at the bottom, the next representation button, there's a button, looks like a book there. Can you press that one?
My screen is now hung. Oh, wait, there we go. The one that looks like a book.
Can you press that button at the bottom? There we go. Then continue, sir. Thanks. Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Mateka. Proceed, sir.
So our farm members are direct clients of Eskom. In the municipality, the load shedding doesn't seem to be as strict as it is on the farms in the rural areas. Just north of us here in Soutpan, we have had farmers that have complained they've had over 8 to 10 hours of load shedding. So some of the direct customers are getting more load shedding. But the other issue relating to the indigents is that a lot of dwellers on farms who are indigents are getting their power from the farmer. And the farmer's not claiming that money back from the local municipality or from government to whoever. So a lot of farmers, besides needing the power for themselves and their operations to produce food, they're also supplying indigents with power because there aren't networks that are connecting those indigents to the grid if the farmer doesn't do it. So just in brief, our position on the increases that Eskom is proposing to NERSA for the next 3 years. Number one, increases beyond inflation are totally unjustifiable, according to Free State Agri and our members. It will have a huge impact on food production and affordability. It already is the high energy costs and on the ability of agriculture and other sectors to create jobs, placing South Africa on an anarchy knife point. And that is a huge concern of ours. We're already seeing an increase in rural crime, and we're already seeing the inability, as was also mentioned by the previous speakers, of law and order to be maintained in South Africa. Okay, I'm struggling to move. Oh, there we go. So if we look at the Bureau for Food and Agricultural Policy, I've said a couple of times in previous presentations to NERSA, is that we don't have the funds as the agricultural sector or as Free State Agriculture or whoever, Agri-SA, to permanently have a model running at the Bureau for Food and Agricultural Policy. They've got big CEG models that model the whole economy, and a small change like energy prices, they can see what impact that's going to have on food price inflation and everything. And NASA regularly asks us, please, give us elasticities, give us statistics and stuff. We cannot maintain those statistics, but the Bureau for Food and Agricultural Policy has the resources to do it. They've got the models to do it that are being run and the professional staff to do it, and they can provide that information. So I think Liz was saying we need to think out of the box. NABSA, if you can please contract BFAP to see the impact on agriculture and food price inflation. But BFAP is not a public benefit organization that will come and make presentations here unless you summon them to do it. And if you summon them to do it, you need to pay them for their services. So I don't know how one can get better information, but these are the people that have got the information. So in their baseline report that they brought out in the beginning of August, they said unreliable power supply from Eskom compounds the risk of trade for South African producers and exporters alike. So over and above the other bottlenecks at our ports and stuff, Eskom is playing a huge impact on this foreign income generation potential that South Africa has. And it's this foreign income that is generated by South Africa that creates tax revenue that enables us to pay for the indigents, to pay for electricity for the indigents. Otherwise, you can't just keep taxing the wealthy and the businesses, because you are taxing them out of productivity, out of work, out of being able to provide for South Africa. So you need another way to provide income to do this. So now I've lost my presentation. Oh, am I still sharing? Sorry, there we go. Sorry. The second quote from the BFAP report is, while economic growth did rebound in 2021, the situation at Eskom is increasingly restricting any prospects of an accelerated recovery. The third quote there from BFAP is, the current dynamism in global markets has heightened focus on the crucial land, water, energy and food nexus, which is increasingly central to climate change discussions globally. Balancing the use and management of natural resources, land and water, to satisfy the increasing demand of human activities, energy and food, and socioeconomic upliftment. Come on. Sorry, I keep to read my slides. I need to get this text box out of the way. And socioeconomic upliftment, jobs, equality will require careful strategic planning, cross-sectional trade-offs. I'm sorry, I'm struggling to see. I can't see my presentation. Okay, let me move on. Planning and cross-sectional trade-offs. So BFAP has got the information, they got the models, and they can predict these models. Their baseline predicts these economic indicators going into the future for 5 to 10 years. So the information is there for NERSA to access from BFAP. Furthermore, Agbiz and the IDC have got an agribusiness confidence index. And in this morning's press release by Wandile Shilobo from Agbiz, he quoted the agribusiness confidence index, saying that it deteriorated by a further 7 points to 53 in the third quarter, following a 2-point decline in the second quarter. Higher input costs, of which Eskom is a huge contributor, factors that that's the survey respondents cited as key concerns. So these are the big agribusinesses in South Africa that supply all the inputs into the agricultural sector and that take the produce from farmers and process it into food for our consumers. They are very concerned about high input costs and the ongoing weaknesses in municipal service delivery and network industries. And we've read of many stories of big corporations, Clover in Lichtenburg, closing down and moving to, well, actually just closing down and not even moving sometimes because of poor service delivery and network industries. In Bloemfontein, Coca-Cola threatened to close because of poor water supply and load shedding. And Mangaung municipality's inability to guarantee, and Senlec to guarantee good power. So diesel has been mentioned as a concern for Eskom. Concerned that the annual budget for diesel for standby generators has come to an end. What then? When there is no more budget for diesel, what then? Furthermore, Eskom cannot be allowed to rely on BEE diesel for daytime backup while there are renewable energy providers waiting to get onto the grid. Regarding the question that Eskom always asks regarding elasticities and alternative energy adoption, the tipping point has far been exceeded for conversion to alternative energy. And as I think Liz also said, finance is one of the big factors hampering the conversion, but also the red tape. Now, NERSA is the regulator that regulates this red tape, but Eskom also plays a big part in actually making sure that people that want to pump into the grid can pump into the grid, and Eskom is not making it easy. And I think part of NERSA's job is to make sure that the systems to apply to pump into the grid are much more go much more smoothly with far less red tape, and then also that Eskom doesn't have control over this red tape, because in our opinion, Eskom is slowing down the process of being able to supply energy into the grid. Furthermore, Eskom needs to supply the statistics on how many of its own members has it lost that were big power producers that suddenly aren't using power. Those are people that have already converted to alternative energy. And then what is the impact going to be on the transmission network if all these rural previous Eskom users are no longer using Eskom? Because they were the ones that were supporting this rural transmission line, which is essential because it extends into townships and rural areas. But when the big users are no longer using those lines, will those indigent users that are basically free riding on this infrastructure that has been built up in the past by these big users is no longer being supported by the monthly contributions of these users. And furthermore, the baseload and the transmission network of Eskom is where they've got their monopoly control points. We desperately need baseload, and we understand that Eskom has to supply that, to supply energy at night when there are no wind and no solar power. But also the transmission network, which Eskom has already built up, is a monopoly. And this is where Eskom has control. And this is what we need to try and break to an extent. I've added this subsequent to sending the slides this afternoon, because I know NERSA always asks for statistics. From Grain South Africa's website, I looked at the producer price framework for irrigation maize for the previous production year. And if we look at irrigation costs, which are the variable costs of electricity being the main component over here, is that we can see that electricity costs contribute 15 for different yields of maize, contribute 13 to 15% of the costs of producing maize. That's just now the fixed costs, but the variable costs of maize production that Eskom contributes to. But I'm not sure how Grain South Africa used the fixed line component of Eskom's bill. If Grain South Africa only used the variable, actual energy cost component of the bill, but the fixed line component is often quite a huge, or it's quite a big component for an irrigation farmer. It's quite small, but for a household who's farming with beef and stuff, the fixed line component is much bigger than his actual energy use. And what we're concerned about, what I showed in the previous slide, is this monopoly that Eskom has over the transmission network, that a lot of small energy users, cattle farmers that only need Eskom for their household, will much quicker than convert and go off the grid and convert to alternative energy. So if we look at the issue of the just transition, Free State Agriculture calls for a just transition from coal-based power production as climate change caused by our carbon emissions in South Africa, or South Africa, Eskom being the biggest carbon emission in Africa, it has a massive impact on farming and food production. So we cannot, from a food production point of view, we cannot afford these carbon emissions that Eskom is currently doing from coal-based food production. We call for a relaxation of red tape to be able to put alternative power into the grid, and we foresee a massive increase in the grid fees, which is a big concern for us. Furthermore, in conclusion, just to reiterate the point that I made in the beginning, increases beyond inflation are totally unjustifiable. These will have a huge impact on food production and affordability, and on the ability of agriculture and other sectors to create jobs, placing South Africa on an anarchy knife point. And this is a huge concern for us as agriculture, but also, I think, for our whole country. And I say thank you, and it's in your hands, NERSA, to make sure that Eskom doesn't further cripple our economy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate finishing on time on this one. I would just like to take this opportunity and give members of the panel to ask questions. I note Mr. Pukula's hand. Mr. Pukula, may come forth.
Thank you, Chair. Mine is a simple one. There's a slide there that has the BE diesel, and I just want to find out what is BE diesel.
Thank you. And then Advocate Stolle.
Yeah, I'm fine, Chairperson. I have no question for the presenter. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm looking at the issue of slide 6, which Mr. Pula has highlighted, and maybe I just like to understand as well what this implies, so you can get to understand it clearly. Then on slide 7 and 8, you talk of a variety of issues here and highlighted the red tape. There are these section 34 determinations that are already out there, and I think about 3 of them are being put before the public for have been put before the public for consultation. So I just want you to talk to specifics in terms of relaxing or removing red tape. You may respond right here and now, or provide us in writing within the 14-day period that you are providing. And then 2, if you can, specific impact or direct impact on Free State's members. For example, if you're talking of migration to using maybe solar PV or alternative or renewable energy forms instead of electricity, we just like to note that maybe the specific impact on the profitability of your members collectively or in terms of specific categories. Yeah, I think that helps, because we need such information when it comes to the socio-economic analysis or looking at that impact analysis. If you can assist in providing that, also in terms of the percentage of electricity into your cost bill. Yeah. I don't know, Mr. Pugula, whether it's a lingering hand or is you just got another question?
May I proceed to answer?
Just a second, just hold on. I saw a hand. I'm not so sure that he is lingering or it's a new hand from Mr. Pugula.
He's still on mute.
Okay. No, it's fine that if it's a new hand, Mr. Pugula will revert to us. Just proceed, sir, to respond.
Thank you very much. I think on the BEE diesel deal, we know that our country has got Black Economic Empowerment legislation in place, and I'm quite sure Eskom has to comply to the procurement according to the Procurement Act. And I wondered to what extent is it not paying more expensive for diesel than it would buying it directly from the supplier without having to go through BE channels. So I think my point in general, and tying up to what Liz said about thinking out of the box, is Eskom as a state-owned entity and the whole process of applying for increases.
Just a second, sir. Sorry there. Just want to get to understand it clearly. If you're talking of BE diesel, are you implying that because it's BE complying to BE, it's coming out more expensive and you would rather have it bought without complying to the BE requirements in the country?
I think Eskom is such a big buyer of diesel that it can buy directly as Eskom from foreign suppliers. It doesn't have to buy through a middleman. So I'm asking NERSA to make sure that Eskom is getting hold of its diesel at the cheapest possible price. And tying up to that, all productivity within Eskom, the Eskom labor structures, are Eskom's employment structures efficient and streamlined and productive? Or can they do away with half of their staff, save a lot of money in salaries? All the buildings that Eskom owns, the offices that Eskom rents, is it efficient? Is it productive? Is it being used productively? And maybe a proposal is to get a company like Productivity SA to do an investigation into the productivity of Eskom. But as a parastatal and the current process, Eskom keeps submitting its wish list and we've just got to supply. But what is Eskom doing itself to become more productive? And does NERSA have an oversight? It's been run as a productive, competitive electricity supplier? Or is NERSA maintaining Eskom as a social services extension of government to supply our social welfare state with cheap electricity, but to pay for it, you've got to extract more and more taxes from the productive citizens of the country? So that's the main point I'm making is net uses and the Section 34 determination. The red tape, number one, you've got to be very big, and the costs, the whole environmental impact assessment process, even though strategic SIAs have been done and certain zones been identified, is still burdensome and takes very long to get new energy into the grid. So there's a lot of red tape. We've got farmer members that have been waiting for months, even years, to get approval. Some have already undergone the capital expenditure of erecting alternative energy for their own needs and are wanting to pay it off quicker by being able to pump energy into the grid, excess energy into the grid. Others are waiting. They've done all their homework. Everything's in place, but they just need the go-ahead from Eskom before they'll commit any financial resources to putting this infrastructure in place. But the red tape is burdensome and it's preventing a lot of capacity going into the grid. And as Liz from Auto also said, Vietnam is already using a rooftop house system to power. I know certain provinces or certain cities in Australia are also generating 100% of their electricity from rooftop solar and storing it in batteries and dams and things like that, and going totally off coal. So there are models to move away from coal. And in my one slide, I showed that we support a just transition to happen quicker rather than slower. And then
just whilst you're there, I would appreciate that in your examples clearly, because I noted that in your response, it's not necessarily talking to the NERSA processes, nor the Department of Energy's processes, as you would also appreciate the 100 megawatt threshold that actually we're still looking forward to that being actually fully utilized by these companies. So you're talking to the issue of the EIAs, but still, if we provide that storage, we from our side can be able to then provide it to the relevant authorities also as emanating from your side, just to make sure that it is clear what this red tape is all about. Thank you. May proceed with the latter part of the response.
Okay, no, thank you. I'll get the affected farmers to supply us with exact report of how long it's taken them to get anything approved, and those that are still waiting, what the red tape burden has been up to now. The last one is Free State Agriculture, and the profitability issues and socioeconomic analysis that you mentioned, the percentage electricity costs. That's all figures that I can supply in writing. yeah, electricity definitely affects the profitability of farming. And, you know, if you think of a dairy, for example, if load shedding is now scheduled, you can plan around it. But if you suddenly have load shedding now changing from your schedule, you know, you suddenly now got to change your labor, and cows that have been milked at 4 o'clock in the morning, the udders are already quite full, you know, by 4 o'clock in the evening when they've got to be milked again. And if load shedding has been lengthened, you can't keep them for another 4 to 6 hours. It becomes unhealthy for the animals and uncomfortable. And you've got to get your labor to come and go. And so most of those farmers that can't operate without reliable energy have already bought generators, and it's costing them a lot more running a generator than Eskom, obviously. But to put up huge, big solar power alternative energy systems is sometimes unaffordable. They can't get financing, but even though the sum might show that it's viable to have that reliability of supply, sometimes the reliable supply is only needed for such a short period that it's not viable to go off Eskom and to use alternative energy. And then all the farmer can resort to is a diesel generator, which costs a lot more than Eskom, obviously, but at least it supplies him for that short period that he needs secure supply with alternative energy. But I can try and find some costs comparisons for you to supply for that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Amwa. We're looking forward to receiving your written comments. We'll then proceed and have Madam Gillian van der Merwe from the Municipal Accounts Disputes to make a presentation. Madam van der Merwe, are you there?
Hello.
Thank you very much. We can see you. Do you have any objections in taking the oath?
No, I don't.
Thank you. Please raise your hand and affirm the following. Do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give this panel is the truth and the whole truth?
I do.
For the record, ma'am, please state your name, company, organization, and designation therein.
Disputes. We represent customers within municipalities and Eskom. We deal with anything relating to disputes, electricity related, anything with service delivery. And we're working throughout South Africa, but I'm based in Rustenburg.
Thank you very much, ma'am. May you please then proceed with your 20 minutes. It's now 15:41. Please proceed with your presentation.
Okay, I'm just going to do a verbal presentation. I don't have any slides. Is that fine? Since 2008, Eskom has evolved from a company providing lights into a palace of darkness, powered by corruption and sabotage, which is fueled by uncontrollable load shedding and exorbitant tariff increases. Once again, as we are here today with the public hearings, which are in progress, Eskom has embarked on a severe load shedding. And this is an annual recurrence. Every time when Eskom requests tariff hikes, they embark on a load shedding, I don't know what you want to call it, but it escalates from stage 1 to stage 6. We request, based on all the facts that and the current economic circumstances of our country, that NASA only grants Eskom a 3 to 6% increase, which is above the Reserve Bank's inflation target. And I want to just also elaborate the fixed charges that Eskom is charging us, the availability charges, that's the network capacity availability charge, the service charge, should be reduced because Eskom is unable to provide these customers with a service. So that they are paying for this whether they consume electricity or not. Now, if you just don't consume electricity, it's understandable that you must pay it, but you cannot consume electricity because of Eskom, because they are bringing in load shedding. So therefore, we're saying Eskom must refund these amounts. The current load shedding is also the key driver for unemployment and recession. And if we go back to 2008, the average price for electricity was 25.62 cents a kilowatt hour, where now we are paying R1.44. That is a 464% increase. And every year, Eskom is telling us they need these increases to stop the load shedding. But since 2008, the load shedding has become much worse. And I'm using an example. I'm taking Rustenburg Municipality, where they pay their Network Act charges, and that's say they shared 10 megawatts. On stage 1, they need to be, because we had 100 days of load shedding this year so far, so they need to refund Rustenburg Municipality with 1.7 million. And if it escalates to stage 6, and stage 6 for the 100 days, then it's 7.8 million. And that's only one municipality. There's 800 applying. So on average, we're looking on stage 1 of 1.3 billion per stage. They're already battling with service delivery. And now Eskom is coming with an additional increase and load shedding. It just not sustainable. Customers cannot simply keep paying for Eskom's inefficiencies and mismanagement. Eskom is also losing billion money. They want these increases. And if we take another example, Cape Town Metro loses 20 million per day, per stage. That's 100. It's now escalated to 120 million per day on stage 6. And there are about 5 or 6 metros. So you can just imagine Eskom is losing because of this load shedding. The more Eskom implements load shedding, the more requesting. Furthermore, if you go and look on Eskom's website, they have a mandate to supply efficient and sustainable manner to contribute to business and enable economic growth. They have totally failed. They are inefficient, they are riddled with corruption, and nothing has been done. Their staff complement has remained the same. We haven't seen any reduction in staff complement. If you look at other businesses, once businesses start being financially constrained, they reduce their staff complement. Eskom doesn't. Eskom just increases their staff complement. So they also need to, from